Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 8, part 1. So he had just fallen asleep in chapter 7 and he had found the raspberries and come into contact with a bear. Chapter 8. At first he thought it was a growl. In the still darkness of the shelter in the middle of the night, his eyes came open and he was awake, and he thought there was a growl. But it was the wind, a medium wind in the pines. He had made some sound that brought him awake. He sat up and was hit with a smell. It terrified him. The smell was one of rot, some musty rot that made him think only the graves with cobwebs and dust and old death. His nostrils widened and he opened his eyes wider, but he could see nothing. It was too dark, too hard dark, with clouds covering even in the small light from the stars, and he could not see. But the smell was alive and full in the shelter. He thought of the bear, he thought of Bigfoot and every monster he had ever seen in every frightening movie he had ever watched, and his heart hammered in his throat. Then he heard the slithering, a slithering brushing sound near his feet, and he kicked out as hard as he could. He kicked out, but he heard a noise coming from his throat. The hatchet mist sailed into the wall where it hit the rocks with a shower of sparks, and his leg was instantly torn with pain, as if 100 needles had been driven into it. Ah! He screamed in fear with the pain, more fear, and skidded on his backside up into the corner of the shelter, breathing in through his mouth, straining to see, straining to hear. The slithering moved again. He thought toward him at first, and terror took him, stopping his breath. He felt he could see low, dark form, a bulk in the darkness, a shadow that lived, but now it moved away, slithering and scraping. It moved away, and he saw... It moved away, and he thought he saw it go out the door. He lay on his side for a moment, then pulled a grasping breath in and held it, listening for the attacker at once. When it was apparent that the shadow wasn't coming back, he felt the calf of his leg where the pain was centered and spreading to the whole leg. His fingers gingerly touched a group of needles that had been driven through his pants and into the fleshy part of his calf. They were stiff and very sharp on the ends that stuck out, and he knew then what the attacker had been. And I'm going to just pause there. What do you think the attacker was? What is an animal that could be around, Brian, that has needles? A porcupine. A porcupine had stumbled into his shelter, and when he had kicked it, the thing had slapped him with his tail of quills. He touched each quill carefully. The pain made it seem as if dozens of them had been slammed into his leg, but there were only 8 or so, pinning the cloth against his skin. He leaned back against the wall for a minute. He couldn't leave them in. They had to come out, but just touching them made the pain more intense. So fast, he thought, so fast things change. When he had gone to sleep, he had satisfaction, and in just over a moment, it was all different. He grasped one of the quills, held his breath, and moved. It sent pain signaling to his brain in tight waves, but he grabbed another, pulled it, and then another. When he had pulled 4 of them, he stopped for a moment. The pain had gone from being a pointed injury pain to spreading in a hot smear up his leg that made him catch his breath. Some of the quills were driven deeper than others, and they tore when they came out. He breathed deeply twice, let half the breath out, and went back to work. Movements. And there were many more times before he lay back in the darkness, done. The pain filled his leg now, and with it came new waves of self-pity. Sitting alone in the dark, his leg aching, some mosquitoes finding him again, he started crying. It was all too much, just too much, and he couldn't take it, not the way it was. I can't take it this way, alone with no fire and in the dark, and next time it might be something worse, maybe a bear, and it wouldn't just be quills in the leg, it would be worse. I can't do this, he thought again and again. I can't. Brian pulled himself up until he was sitting back in the corner of the cave. He put his head down on his arms across his knees with stiffness, taking his left leg, and cried until he was all cried out. He did not know how long it took, but later he looked back on the time of crying in the corner of the dark cave and thought of it as what he learned the most important rule of survival. which was that feeling sorry for yourself didn't work. It wasn't just that it was wrong to do or that it was considered incorrect. It was more than that. It just simply didn't work. When he sat alone in the darkness and cried and was all done with it, absolutely nothing had changed. His legs still hurt, it was still dark, and he was still alone, and the self-pity had accomplished nothing. At last he slept again, but already his patterns were changing, and the sleep was light. A restless doze, more than a deep sleep, with small sounds awakening him twice in the rest of the night. In the last doze period before daylight, before he awakened finally with the morning light and the clouds of new mosquitoes, he dreamed. This time it was not of his mother or the secret, but of his father at first, and then of his friend Terry. I'm going to stop there. That was Chapter 8, Part 1. You can look forward to Chapter 8, Part 2.